I came home from the war in the spring of 1942 with a limp and a head full of noise. 3 years on a destroyer in the Atlantic, dodging U-boats and watching good men sink, had left me hollowed out. The Admiralty gave me a month's leave, said I'd earned it after a shell took a chunk of my leg off Iceland. So I went north, to my mother's house in Oban, a grey little port on Scotland's west coast. She'd died the year before, pneumonia they said, and the place was mine now, a sagging cottage overlooking the harbor. I didn't plan to stay long, just long enough to quiet the ringing in my ears. But then I found the lantern. It was in the attic, buried under a pile of moth-eaten blankets and my grandfather's old fishing gear. I'd gone up there on my second day, restless, needing something to do with my hands. The trapdoor creaked under my weight, and the air smelled of dust and salt. I shifted a crate of rusted hooks and saw it, a small brass lantern, dented but solid, its glass panes cracked but intact. No wick, no oil reservoir, just an empty cage of metal and a faint warmth when I touched it. I lifted it, heavier than it looked, and a shiver ran up my arm, sharp and quick. There was a name scratched into the base, barely legible. Malcolm Carver, my grandfather. He'd been a smuggler, or so the family whispers went, lost at sea in 1890 when my mother was a girl. I took it downstairs, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it while the kettle boiled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the cottage, and the sea growled outside, a sound I knew too well. I'd left the lantern by the hearth, unlit, but around midnight I woke to a faint glow spilling across the floor. I sat up, my leg throbbing, and saw it. The lantern was alight, a soft amber flicker dancing inside, casting shadows on the walls. I hobbled over, half expecting a trick of my eyes, but it burned steady. No fuel, no flame I could see. Then the shadows moved. Not random shapes, but a jagged outline. A ship's hull splintering against rocks, waves swallowing it whole. I blinked, and it was gone, the glow dimming to nothing. My heart pounded, and I told myself it was fatigue, the war playing tricks. But I couldn't shake the image. The next morning, I packed a bag and caught a ferry to one of the outer islands, a bleak speck called Dub. I'd found a letter in the attic with the lantern, yellowed and brittle, from my grandfather to my mother. It mentioned the island, a drop point for his runs, and I needed answers. The crossing was rough, the boat pitching in the swell, and I gripped the railing with one hand, the lantern tucked under my arm. The skipper, a grizzled man with a pipe clenched in his teeth, eyed it and muttered something in Gaelic. I asked what he said. He shrugged and spat over the side. Old light. Bad luck. I didn't press him. The war had taught me when to let silence sit. Dub was a slab of rock and heather, barely a mile across, with a handful of stone cottages clinging to the shore. A fishing hamlet, half abandoned, its people weathered like the cliffs. I rented a room above the only pub, a damp place called the Black Shag, and set the lantern on the windowsill overlooking the sea. The landlord, a wiry woman named Morag, took my shillings and warned me about the tides. They turn quick here, she said, her eyes flicking to the lantern, and some things don't like being dug up. I nodded, polite but dismissive, and spent the day walking the island, my cane sinking into the mud. I was looking for the wreck, or some sign of it, though I didn't know why. The lantern felt like a tether, pulling me towards something I couldn't name. That night it glowed again. I'd been dozing in a chair by the fire when the light woke me, brighter this time, painting the room in gold. The shadows came back, sharper, a ship breaking apart, men scrambling on deck, their mouths open in silent screams. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass, and saw a figure at the helm, tall and broad, his coat flapping in the storm. It looked like my grandfather, or what I imagined him to be from old photos, stern and unyielding. The glow pulsed, and I heard a sound, faint but real, a low groan like wood splintering. I grabbed my notebook and sketched it, my hands shaking, then sat back as the light faded. The pub was quiet below, but I felt watched. The next day I asked around. Started with Morag, casual over breakfast porridge. Ever hear of a wreck off the island? Late 1800s, maybe? She stirred her pot and didn't look up. Plenty sink out here. Storms don't care. I mentioned the lantern, said it was my grandfather's. Her spoon stopped. Carver, you said your name was. I nodded. She set the pot down and wiped her hands. That's the casket light. Been gone 50 years. You'd best throw it back where you found it. I pressed her, asked what she meant. She turned away. It calls things that should stay down. I didn't throw it back. I took it to the shore instead, a rocky strip where the waves gnashed at the cliffs. The islanders watched me from their windows, their faces pale smudges behind glass. I set the lantern on a boulder and waited, the wind cutting through my coat. Dusk fell, and it glowed again, unprompted, the shipwreck playing out on the rocks like a silent film. This time I saw more. The crew drowning, clawing at the water, and my grandfather standing still, holding the lantern high as the sea took them. A voice came with it, rough and faint. His voice, I guessed. We paid the price. I stumbled back, my cane slipping, and the light snapped off. Back at the pub, I found an old man nursing a whiskey, his hands gnarled from years at sea. I bought him another and asked about the Carvers. He squinted at me, then at the lantern I'd set on the table. Malcolm was a hard man, he said finally. Ran whiskey and worse. Lost his ship in a squall, him and all hands. Folks said he cheated the sea, kept what wasn't his. He tapped the glass. That's why it glows. It's theirs, not yours. I leaned in, my pulse quickening. Theirs. He drained his drink and stood. The ones he left behind, they don't forget. I sat there alone, the lantern dark between us, and felt the weight of it. My grandfather's price, whatever it was, had followed him down, and now it was following me. I took it upstairs and locked the door, the sea louder outside than it should have been. The glow came again, late, and this time I heard him clear as day, his voice cutting through the groan of the wreck. James, let it go. My name, from a man I'd never met. I stared at the lantern, its light flickering like a heartbeat, and knew I couldn't. I woke the next morning with the lantern's glow still burned into my eyes, my grandfather's voice echoing in my skull. James, let it go. It wasn't a plea I could heed, not with my name scratched into its brass and the sea whispering outside my window. The room above the black shag felt smaller, the walls damp and close, and my leg ached worse than it had in weeks. I pulled on my coat, the navy wool stiff with salt, and took the lantern downstairs, setting it on the bar while Morag scrubbed mugs. She glanced at it, her mouth tightening, and said nothing. I didn't ask. I'd learned on the ship that silence from the crew meant more than words. The island felt different that day, heavier, like the fog had settled into the stones. I walked the shore again, my cane sinking into the shingle, the lantern swinging from my hand. It stayed dark, cold to the touch, but I kept it close, half expecting it to flare up unbidden. The old man's words from the night before gnawed at me. The ones he left behind. They don't forget. I needed more than rumors. I headed for the tiny kirk at the island's north end, a squat stone building with a roof half caved from neglect. If there was a record of my grandfather's wreck, it'd be there, buried in some moldy ledger. The door creaked open under my push, and the air inside smelled of wet earth and wax. A single stained glass window, cracked but glowing faintly red, cast jagged light across the pews. No one was there, not even a caretaker, but I found a vestry in the back, its shelves sagging with books and papers. I set the lantern on a table and started digging, my fingers blackening with dust. Most of it was useless, baptisms and burials from the last century. But then I found it, a log book bound in cracked leather, dated 1880 to 1895. I flipped to November 1890, the month my mother always said her father vanished. There it was in faded ink. Ship lost off Ailen due 14th November. The casket, Malcolm Carver master. All hands gone. No bodies found. Below a note in a shakier hand. Lights seen offshore, 3 nights after. Unnatural. I sat back, the chair groaning under me, and stared at the page. Unnatural. The lantern sat there, silent, but I felt it watching. I kept searching, pulling out a bundle of loose papers tied with twine. One was a letter, unsigned, dated a week later. He took what wasn't his. The sea remembers. Burn the light if it comes back. I folded it into my pocket and looked at the lantern, its brass dull in the dimness. My grandfather had stolen something, cheated the sea, and paid for it. But what? And why was it glowing now, calling my name? I left the kirk with more questions than answers, the lantern heavier in my grip. The islanders avoided me as I walked back, their doors shutting soft but firm. I stopped at the shore again, near the boulder from yesterday, and set the lantern down. The tide was out, exposing a stretch of jagged rocks, and I scanned them, looking for anything that matched the wreck in the glow. Nothing but seaweed and gulls. I sat there until dusk, the cold seeping through my coat, and waited. The lantern flickered on as the light died, its glow spreading across the shingle. The ship appeared again, splintering on invisible reefs, the crew clawing at the waves. I leaned closer, my breath catching, and saw my grandfather clearer this time, his face lined and hard, holding the lantern aloft. Then something new, a figure in the water, reaching up, its eyes glinting gold. Me! I stood fast, my cane slipping, and the glow snapped off. My reflection in the sea was just my own, tired and unshaven, but my pulse wouldn't slow. I grabbed the lantern and hobbled back to the pub, the wind sharper now, carrying a sound like distant shouts. Morag was behind the bar when I got in, her eyes narrowing as I set the lantern down. "You've been at it again," she said, her voice low. I nodded, too rattled to dodge. It showed me the wreck, and me in it. She stopped wiping the counter and crossed her arms. "You're a carver. It knows you, always has." I leaned in, my voice tight. "Knows me how? What did he take?" She shook her head. "Ask the fishermen. They'll hate you for it, but they know." I found one that night, a wiry man named Ian, hunched over a pint in the corner. His hands were scarred, his face weathered like driftwood, and he didn't look up when I sat across from him. I slid a shilling over and asked about the wreck. He pocketed it, slow, and took a long drink before speaking. "Malcolm ran more than whiskey," he said, his voice rough as the sea. "Took things from wrecks he shouldn't have. Gold, trinkets, old stuff from the deep. Said it was his right." He glanced at the lantern, its glass catching the firelight. "That was one of 'em. Glowed even then. Night he went down, it shone bright as day. Lit the way to hell." I swallowed hard. "And after?" Ian's eyes met mine, dark and steady. "Kept glowing. Washed up 3 days later. They threw it back. Didn't take." I sat back, the room spinning. My grandfather had plundered something sacred or cursed, and the lantern was part of it. A beacon, maybe, or a claim. I asked Ian what it called. He finished his pint and stood. "The drowned, the ones he left. You'll see." He left me there, the lantern between us, and I felt its warmth again, faint but growing. I took it upstairs and locked the door, my hands unsteady. The glow came late, stronger, painting the walls with the wreck. This time the crew moved slower, their faces clearer, and I recognized one. My mother's uncle, lost with Malcolm, his mouth open in a scream. The lantern pulsed, and their voices broke through, a chorus of groans and pleas. "Give it back," they said over and over. "Give it back." I couldn't sleep after that. I sat by the window, the sea black beyond the glass, and sketched what I'd seen, my pencil trembling. The next day I went to the cliffs, a steep drop where the island met the deep. The lantern glowed in broad daylight now, unprompted, showing flickers of the wreck even in the sun. I held it over the edge, half tempted to drop it, but my grandfather's voice stopped me, sharp and close. "James, don't!" I pulled it back, my heart thudding, and saw something offshore, a shadow under the waves, too big for a boat. I grabbed my binoculars, a battered pair from the ship, and focused. A hull, broken and barnacled, jutted from the water, then sank as I watched, gone by the time I lowered the glass. Back at the pub, I cornered Morag. "I saw it," I said, my voice low. "The wreck. It's out there." She didn't flinch, just kept polishing a glass. "Aye, shows itself sometimes, not for long." I slammed the lantern on the bar, harder than I meant. "What's it want? Why me?" She set the glass down and looked at me, her eyes old and tired. "You're his blood. It's yours to carry now." Always was. I stepped back, the weight of it sinking in. My grandfather's dead, passed down like the lantern itself. I asked her to help me find it, end it. She laughed. "End it? You don't end the sea. You live with it." That night I took a skiff from the harbor, the lantern glowing at the bow. The tide was calm, the island silent behind me, and I rowed toward where I'd seen the shadow. The glow spread, lighting the water, and the wreck shimmered below, closer than it should have been. I stopped rowing, the oars dripping, and watched. The ship took shape, its masts jagged, its deck alive with shadows. My grandfather stood there holding the lantern, his eyes on me. The crew crowded behind him, their faces pale and wet, and I saw myself among them, reaching up. The boat rocked, and his voice came again, soft this time. "We paid, James. You will too." The glow flared, blinding, and I shut my eyes. When I opened them, the wreck was gone, the sea black and still. I rowed back, the lantern dark in my hands, and felt it. The pull, the weight, not just of brass, but of something older, deeper. I understood it now, or part of it. My grandfather's bargain, his theft, had bound us to the drowned, and the lantern was their tether. But what they wanted, what it meant to give it back, stayed just out of reach. I didn't sleep after rowing back from the wreck that night. The lantern sat on the floor by my bed, dark and cold, but its weight pressed against me all the same. My hands still shook from gripping the oars, my leg throbbed where the war had carved it, and the sea outside the pub window hissed like it knew I'd seen too much. My grandfather's voice stayed with me, soft and final. "We paid, James. You will too." I'd glimpsed the hull under the waves, felt the drowned watching, and understood something had tethered them to the lantern, to me. But the why, the how to break it, slipped through my fingers like water. Dawn came gray and slow, and I knew I had to go back. I took the skiff again, the lantern at my feet, its brass glinting faintly in the morning mist. The harbor was quiet, the islanders indoors, their curtains drawn tight. Morag watched me from the pub door as I shoved off, her face unreadable, and I wondered if she'd known this was coming. The tide was low, the sea flat as a mirror, and I rode steady, my breath fogging in the chill. I wasn't sure where I was going, just followed the pull, that ache in my chest that matched the lantern's warmth when it flared. The wreck had shown itself once. It would again. I needed to see it through, not for heroics, but for the Carver blood in my veins that wouldn't let me turn away. Half a mile out, the lantern glowed. No warning, just a sudden amber bloom that lit the skiff's bow and spilled across the water. I stopped rowing, the oars dripping, and watched. The sea shimmered, then parted, a shadow rising slow and deliberate below. The wreck took shape, clearer than before, its hull splintered but whole, masts jagged against the sky. I leaned over the side, the glow reflecting in my eyes, and saw them. The crew, pale and still, standing on the deck, their coats sodden, their faces turned up. My grandfather at the helm, the lantern in his hands, its light matching mine. I called out, my voice hoarse, "Malcolm, what did you do?" The sea swallowed the sound, but his head tilted, like he'd heard. The glow pulsed and their voices came, a low murmur rising to a wail. "Give it back," they chanted, the words weaving through the creak of the ship. "Give it back." I gripped the lantern, its heat searing my palms, and shouted again, "Give what back? Tell me!" The wreck shuddered, Waves lapping at its sides, and my grandfather stepped forward, his boots silent on the deck. His face was sharper now, lined with years I'd never seen, his eyes gold in the light. "We took their rest," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "I promised them passage, kept it instead." The crew pressed closer, their hands reaching, and I saw myself among them again, my own face staring back, mouth open in a plea. I pulled back, the skiff rocking, and the lantern flared brighter, blinding. When the light dimmed, the wreck was closer, its bow nearly touching mine. I could smell it, rot and salt and something older, like damp stone. My grandfather's voice came again, softer. "The sea gave us gold. I gave it nothing. The light holds them." I looked at the lantern, its glow steady now, and felt the truth settle. He'd plundered a wreck, some ancient hulk lost to the deep, and taken more than coin. Something sacred, a promise to the drowned, sealed in the lantern's brass. He'd cheated them, kept it burning, and they'd followed him down. Now they followed me. I rowed closer, the skiff grazing the wreck's side, and stood, my cane braced against the seat. The crew watched, silent, their eyes glinting like coins. I held the lantern over the water, my arms trembling, and asked, "What do you want? To rest?" My grandfather nodded, slow and heavy. "Give it back, James. Let us go." I hesitated, the warmth pulsing up my wrists, and saw the wreck shift, its timbers groaning. A hatch gaped open on the deck, dark and wet, and I knew what I had to do. I climbed aboard, my legs screaming as I hauled myself over the rail, the lantern swinging from my hand. The wood was slick, the air thick with decay, and the crew parted, their shadows stretching long in the glow. I stumbled to the hatch and peered down. Stairs descended into black, the water lapping at the bottom, and a faint hum rose like the lantern's heartbeat. I took the steps, slow and careful, the glow lighting my way. The hold was flooded, knee-deep, and crates floated in the murk, their lids pried open. Gold glinted inside, coins and chains, but something else caught the light, a small stone box, carved with runes I couldn't read. It pulsed in time with the lantern, warm even through the damp, and I knew it was theirs, the heart of the bargain. I set the lantern beside it, the glows merging, and the ship trembled, a low moan rolling through the hull. My grandfather's voice came from above, close now. "You found it." I looked up, and he stood at the hatch, the crew behind him, their faces softer, less desperate. "What is it?" I asked, my voice echoing in the hold. He knelt, his coat dripping, and said, "Their passage, a reliquary older than us. I took it, thought it was mine to claim. The sea disagreed." I touched the box, its warmth spreading through me, and felt the weight of it, not just stone but lives, promises unkept. "Why me?" I asked. He smiled, faint and sad. "You're the last. It waited for you." The wreck shuddered again, harder, and water surged around my legs, cold and pulling. I grabbed the lantern and climbed out, the crew watching, their hands still now. My grandfather stayed by the hatch, his eyes on the box below. "Give it back," he said one last time. I stood on the deck, the skiff bobbing beside me, and looked at the lantern, then the reliquary glowing in the hold. I could take it, row away, keep it safe on land. But the sea pressed in, the wreck tilting, and I understood. It wasn't mine to end, only to see. I set the lantern down, its light flaring gold, and stepped back into the skiff. The crew moved, slow and deliberate, lifting the box from the water, their shadows merging with the glow. The wreck sank as I rowed away, the lantern's light fading under the waves, taking them with it. I heard their voices one last time, a sigh more than a wail, and my grandfather's, soft as the tide. "Thank you, James." The sea went still, the skiff rocking gently, and I sat there, soaked and shivering, until the island loomed ahead. I beached the boat and stumbled to the pub, my cane sinking into the sand. Morag was there, sweeping the floor, and didn't look surprised when I walked in empty-handed. "It's gone," I said, my voice rough. She nodded slow. "Aye, for now." I left Island Dube the next day, the ferry cutting through a calm sea, the island shrinking behind me. My bag was lighter without the lantern, but the weight stayed, a quiet ache in my chest. Back in Oban, I unpacked my sketches, the letter, the logbook page, and spread them on the kitchen table. The wreck was real, the reliquary too, a piece of something ancient my grandfather had stolen and bound to us. He'd promised the drowned passage rest and kept it burning instead, a debt the sea wouldn't forgive. I saw it clear now, the bargain's shape, but not its end. The lantern was theirs again, sunk with them, but the pull lingered. Weeks later, back on the destroyer, I stood watch under a storm-lit sky, the Atlantic rolling black beneath us. The crew laughed below decks, their voices sharp against the wind. And I felt it again, that warmth in my hands, faint but there. I looked overboard, half expecting a glow, a shadow, but saw only waves. That night in my bunk, I dreamed of the wreck, the crew standing silent, my grandfather at the helm. He didn't speak, just watched me, his eyes gold and steady. I woke to the ship's bell, my sketchbook open beside me, a new drawing in my hand. The lantern glowing on the sea floor, its light reaching up. I understood it then, or as much as I could. The drowned had their rest, or something close. But the sea remembered. The lantern tied us still, a thread I couldn't cut, a price I'd carry without knowing its full shape. It wasn't over, not for me, not for the carvers. The mystery held quiet and deep, and I let it.